getting close to a quorum here. I'm Eric Jensen. I am the facilitator for the work group, for those of you who I may not have met already. And we, as usual, have a full agenda today. We have a couple of topics that Josh is going to be talking about today. One on process improvements related to seizures, and then a presentation related to peripheral support and resources, enforcement, compliance, and staffing. And we'll have an opportunity for discussion after each of those presentations. I would like to welcome, I think we have a couple of people here that are sitting in for others. Logan Giles, I believe, is here from DEQ to sub for Abby Boderis. And then David Dickerson, I believe, should be here as well for Rachel Fisher with the National Marine Manufacturers Association. So let's move on. As usual, whoops, okay. There was a slide back there in case you needed our contact information, my information as your facilitator. If you want to reach out to me for anything related to the facilitation is there. And then, of course, Kate and Josh are both on here for any questions you have about the work group. So, all right, so moving on, we are going to remind you about the meeting schedule, but also talk about, mention a couple of new meetings that are on there. First of all, and we want to highlight this, the next meeting on December 5th is a hybrid meeting in Salem. And Kate, is there anything you want to say special about that meeting?
Just that I did send out an update to that event calendar, as well as I will be following up, for we're also going to be hosting for the ADV work group members a lunch optional beforehand. So stay tuned for a little lunch order form from me, maybe later, maybe early next week, probably. But I hope, I think already half the folks have RSVP'd yes to in person, so that's kind of exciting. So thank you for all of you that were able to travel down or over or up to Salem.
Great, thanks, Kate. And just highlighting a couple of new meeting dates there on January 9th, January 23rd, both online meetings. As well as the one that you already should have on your calendar, the December 19th meeting. And then we've got a couple, one in March and then one in April. So more about those coming out. Going to the next slide. We are, so just a reminder for those of you who are on the ADV work group, please remember to use the raise your hand feature to speak. And if you need a refresher, the reactions near the bottom of your screen, you just click on that and click raise your hand, and or by pressing *9 if you're on the phone. I believe we do have an exception here with Sergeant Dangler, who I think has had difficulty finding, there's not a button for him, I don't think. But that would be the one exception to the rule here. You'll be called in order in which the hands are raised, and keep your mic muted unless it's your turn to speak. Now, when it is your turn to speak, please introduce yourself at the beginning. Not everybody on the call, this is a public meeting, not everybody on the call may know who you are. And so if you could just give your name and the agency or the organization that you're with, that would be great. Also, if you could please remember that we have people with different levels of knowledge and experience related to this issue. So remember that you're speaking to a broader group that may or may not know all of the acronyms, or may not understand the full processes. So please be cognizant of that as you're making your comments when you're talking. And of course, as always, be respectful of your fellow work group members and other participants. So one of the things I'd like to highlight for you at the beginning here is this time we're going to do something a little bit different when we get to discussion. We're going to bring everybody up on screen, in part because it's easier for me as a facilitator to see all the faces. And we're going to be asking you at that point, if you don't already have your camera on, to please turn your camera on for the discussion. So we want to give you enough time to kind of prepare for that big reveal. So, all right. So with that, in terms of community involvement, for those of you who may not have seen this before, the work group meetings are open to the public, and we do allow limited time on the agenda for input from the community members. And we ask that during the discussion periods that only the work group members are involved in the discussions, but there will be a period allowed for community input. The current information and materials are posted on the DSL website. Meetings are noticed a week in advance, and the recordings are made available. So if you need to catch up and want to see what's happened in previous meetings, you can. And also note that in early 2024, DSL is going to be opening up a comment period for the proposed ADV program framework prior to bringing recommendations before the land board for a decision. So, all right. So with that, I think we move over to Josh.
You do. Thank you very much, Eric. My name is Josh Mahal. I'm Waterway Stewardship Manager for the Department of State Lands. Some updates from the department before I get into this portion of the presentation. So as far as updates, not too much from me right now since we met last 2 weeks ago. I expect at the December 5th meeting that we'll have multiple staffing updates for the ADV team at the department. But just for full transparency, I want to let you guys know what we've been working on in the last month or so. Been working with DEQ on making sure that we're clear on disposal, permitting, and best management practices, and making sure that any kind of removals and disposals we do are in line with other state laws. I've been digging into some issues regarding insurance and what that might look like. We're going to talk about that at one of the December meetings. I'm also beginning to work on a reporting and data collection tool. And then also, and maybe more importantly, building a prioritization formula for how we assess different vessels for removal. And then the last thing is just looking at what's currently in waters of the state, determining if there are things right now that we're going to prioritize for removal in early to mid 2024. So that's what's going on here. So for today's presentation, if you want to call it that, we're trying to switch gears a little bit into having the work group come up with some solutions to all these challenges. So it's going to be less of me talking about the problems. I'm going to bring up some of the problems, bring up some of the potential solutions, or at least questions that I have where the solutions are. And then my hope is for the majority of this meeting, it is the work group members talking about solutions to these challenges. So I have 2 slides here, and then I'm going to kick it to the group. And as Eric said, we're going to take the slides down. And truly, what I'm looking for here, you'll see me here writing, taking a lot of notes, is okay. What is the group? What do I need to do? What do we need to propose to address these issues? I mean, this is why we're all here. So I want to see the work group, work for the next couple hours, the next couple meetings. So anyway, regarding vessel seizure and process challenges, I figured this was a good topic to start with as we get into this working group phase, just because we heard a lot of the challenges. I'm aware of a lot of challenges, but I want to start identifying those solutions and figure out how we make those happen. So briefly, during the interviews from this summer, we certainly heard a lot of frustration about the legal authorities to address ADVs, and also a lot about the time period in which it takes to legally address them. Also issues with the tedious process to address things that many of you see as simply garbage. Also just issues with the process in general, the storage, the paperwork. So those of you that might not know, to legally seize, salvage, ultimately dispose of a watercraft in Oregon, which is titled property, there is a legal process that takes multiple months, multiple notifications, and it can be a challenge. As someone that's gone through those many times, it sometimes feels overburdensome. So we certainly heard those issues as well. And then the last thing we'll bring up is that general comparison to cars. How many of you said, hey, this process for vehicles, it works. Why is there not something in place similar for boats? So can you go to I don't even know who's driving. Can we go to the next slide? Perfect. So here are my kind of open-ended questions for the group. And I'd like to see some discussion on all these. But regarding that vessel and seizure storage process, what causes the issues for enforcement agencies? What are those barriers that make it unreasonable, potentially too expensive to address ADVs within your local jurisdiction? And then also on top of that, I mean, specifically, what do those solutions look like? I'm also very curious in what ways that we at DSL can provide better support for those enforcement agencies, or help with those processes. You know, if there are things that we can do here that make it easier for some of you to do work out in the field, let me know what those might look like. We talked previously about a reimbursement mechanism for enforcement agencies, ports, all that. And we're still going to explore that. But if that happens, what other capacity do we need to build here to make it easier for you to do that kind of work? A question that I also have, similar to what was brought up by you all, is there a condition of a boat that this group might deem as, hey, let's look at a way of classifying it as something other than titled property, where it can be disposed of without going through this rather arduous process. And if we identify, you know, that's a route that this group wants to go, what criteria should be evaluated? Boat size, boat length, boat registration status. I mean, I'm interested in what this group would support if we're going to try to put something eventually forward to the legislature that might change some statutory definitions. And then there's a lot of folks here that are law enforcement, other local authorities, and there's certainly some port folks on the call. What other challenges have you faced that need to be on our radar, and also that we may have the capacity to address and fix as part of the work of this work group? And then also from the private marina folks, I know there's at least one on the call right now. The statutes are a little bit different for you. What might need to be done to allow you to deal with ADVs in your jurisdiction, in your leaseholds, that you are not currently equipped to deal with. And so that's really it for me, Eric. I'd like to kick it to the group, and I just want to hear some solutions that we can start working on.
All right, thank you, Josh. So at this point, what we'd like to do is have all of you who are work group members, if you wouldn't mind turning on your cameras if your cameras aren't on yet. We get to see your work environment, including whether you're out there in the sand dunes there, Laurel, or wherever you're at. So Okay, so what we'd like to do is Josh had a number of questions there that he showed on that last slide. And I'd like to start off with the vessel seizure and storage process. And what, particularly the law enforcement folks here, what causes issues for you as law enforcement folks with regard to vessel seizure and storage process? Anybody? I'm not seeing. Here we go. Sergeant Dangler. You got the hand working this time.
I did. I have to give all the credit to Dorothy that helped guide me through where all the certain functions are located. So some of the barriers that we face are obviously the financial barriers right off the get-go, knowing that, okay, as we grab this boat, somebody is going to want payment if we are not able to do it. So how do we provide payment? Our county isn't set up for a budgeted expense for us to be towing boats at a cost of $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 at a time. Secondly, as mentioned, obviously we have that storage piece that creates those additional costs. And, you know, again, we don't have anything set up where we are in any way, shape, or form able to pay all of those expenses or fees. We're just not budgeted for that. That being said, we can certainly assist in liaison and help facilitate. We just need the ability to be able to pull from some funds to make that happen.
Great. So, you know, you brought up a couple of things here with regard, first of all, with regard to payment. Is there anything in particular that you think might be helpful specifically in that regard? I mean, obviously the payment, but way to make that happen.
Yeah, a streamlining process that we have so many contractors across the state that we can either reach out to, or, you know, with our county, we actually have a service desk that we just basically call in and say, hey, this is what I have. I need a tow. Tow company contacts us. They would come out, take care of it. We write a quick report, and then we're on to the next. So a process in place that would help streamline that would be fantastic. And again, that comes down to, you know, a rotation of tow companies, or however that would be worked out. I know that's how it works out for the street. Our tow desk has a rotation of tow companies that sign up to contract, and you just get what you get. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Yeah. Okay, great. Josh, did you have a comment on that?
I had a follow-up question. I think Sergeant Dangler kind of just answered it right there. But you know, if a mechanism was in place where financially there was a guarantee of reimbursement or being taken care of, and there was a list of companies on some sort of agreement, you know, with the state, how far, I can't promise either of those things necessarily, but if those were in place, how far would those go to addressing the concerns that you're bringing up?
That would be, it would be a start in the right direction. However, and I can only really speak for our agency because it's a little bit larger than what some other agencies do. But for myself, I've got 8 deputies out there working, and on any given day, they could be processing these tows. I don't know how our agency would then begin to keep track of what is occurring and how those expenses are being managed and facilitated, rather than just being able to have, you know, that central point of contact where, okay, we contact somebody that contracts through DSL, and all of those finances get covered by the same agency, and it takes out that middleman. So we'll help liaison and facilitate the cleaning and the removal. We just need that contact to be able to pull from to financially make these things occur.
Great. Thank you, Sergeant. Yes, Aaron. Did we lose Aaron? Oh, are you on mute?
Yeah, it'd help if I unmuted myself. No, one of the things I like about that approach that I think would be helpful is if you can contract not just the towing, but the storage and everything all into one, because then a lot of the problems that we run into dealing with the property and the storing of it and the claiming of it and all that stuff, it can be taken on by a private company who specializes in that, and they can have an entire product line that just deals with that. Because for a government entity like us, it's one of the many things that we would have to do, aside from all the other stuff that we're responsible for, that we just don't have the staffing for, we don't have the specialty for, or any of that stuff. But it would allow industry to take care of this. And we would also potentially avoid having to throw a bunch of government money directly at the problem, and kind of incentivizing the dumping of stuff. But it would get it off the water. It would get it into someone's hands who could then dispose of it properly. And yeah, that's if you could do all the way soup to nuts, that would be great in contracting.
Great. Thank you. All right. Yes, Sergeant Dangler.
Yeah, on that same note, where he ended, when it comes to the storage, there's that liability piece that comes along with storage that law enforcement is all too familiar with. When we pull somebody's vehicle or vessel, and they claim all of a sudden, they've got 50 gold bars in the boat. So having that tow company have a facility that those things can be secured, property owners can come and get their belongings if they so wish, that they have the staff there to do that. We don't have those types of storage facilities where we can hold things, especially large boats, securely for long periods of time, nor do we have the staff that can just walk out there and help facilitate them getting belongings off the vessel. So again, that full encapsulation, like he was talking about, is a huge step.
Yeah, so it's more than just storage, so to speak, in terms of putting the vessel in storage. It's also the belongings and being able to house those somehow securely. Okay, great. All right. What about other suggestions about how DSL can help to support and build capacity in these processes? Any? Stan.
All right, Stan Tonneson, Rocky Point Marina and Blue board member. I've been gone for the last 3 meetings, so I've watched the videos, so I'm up to speed on things. We have a marina and a boatyard here, and we're more than happy. This is our personal experience, how things work. To accept a boat that's derelict in most cases, provided there's a trailer here we have a storage yard 2 miles from here that will take it and do all that storage, the 30 days and security, and then they'll get rid of the boat. But we don't have space for storing the boat, but we can tow it or have it towed in. I have a big travel lift, and we work closely with the transport company, and they can be there when we lift it out, and it's off of our plate. But again, we won't touch anything without knowing it's going to get paid and that it's going to be taken away. So I just want to put that in. Our kind of situation doesn't apply statewide, obviously.
So yeah, but being able to know what that process is, before you pull something out of the water, is going to be key.
Yeah, I've done it 3 times with Dorothy, and I said, there's a boat. She'd streamlined it within the day on the paperwork so that we could seize the vessel or tow it into our facility, load it directly onto a truck, and then it disappears from us. down to the storage yard slash dismantling yard, and they take it from there.
Okay, great.
In that case, a lot of those have to do with the timing of how fast you can do the paperwork. And Dorothy could speak on that, of what there's certain instances where she can do it within a few hours or a day. So that's my 2 cents worth on that.
Great 2 cents. Thank you very much. Stephanie, you're next.
Hi, everybody. Stephanie Rawson. I'm from Metro. Couple comments and a question. It'd be good to know, I realize I don't fully know the requirements currently with regards to personal belongings on a dumped or an abandoned vessel. If someone could maybe put it in the link, or I'm happy to, I don't want to digress this conversation about that, because hearing the conversations what folks are talking about, it's making me think a lot about the requirements when it comes to storing people's belongings when people are living outside and you're clearing up their encampment. But there's certain times where it's not at play. So just curious, it'd be good to learn a little bit more what the current requirements are. I don't know if there are specific requirements spelled out. Seeing Josh kind of shake his head no. So I wonder if it's more of we need to define what the criteria is and what is a belonging, because I think without clearly knowing what is considered a belonging, it makes it hard to know, like, do I need to keep this rusted out gas can, or what are currently the requirements for documenting the conditions? Because often when, just a little side note, I deal with dumped and abandoned boats primarily on land, but I will work with our Parks Department, DSL, Oregon State Marine Board, River Patrol, and many others trying to deal with that. We look at the condition, and there's times where we have a dump boat, we don't even call Oregon State Marine Board to see if it's registered because of the condition. That kind of gets into the next question. And we look to see what's inside the boat, and we're like, there's no personal property. We're actually looking for hazards for disposal. So for me, in order to answer that question about personal belongings, I feel like we need to kind of know what that is. I'll stop there because I have other comments that kind of go offline.
Okay, well, let's turn to Josh for a second, because I think, Josh, you were going to respond to that, were you?
Yeah, I'd like to, Stephanie brings up a great point and then a great question. What to deal with personal belongings in a boat that's declared abandoned or derelict is somewhat of a gray area. As we look at potentially streamlining a seizure storage process, I would personally prefer that those be better defined. I don't love operating in that gray area. What do you do with things in a boat that might end up being seized? I know that as part of current practices, a lot of times all that's just considered incidental to the boat, and so it's all part of the boat. But I haven't been necessarily comfortable with that. And then also, Stephanie, I'm interested in what you said regarding, when you find a boat and it's in such a condition that it doesn't merit following up on ownership or whatever. I would be in favor of a statewide legal process to declare that situation, as opposed to just kind of making a judgment call. So I'm interested in actually hearing from you more. It doesn't necessarily have to be right now on what are those conditions where we're just going to deal with it in a different, more garbage way.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to talk more about that kind of when we get to that series of questions. I don't want to derail it. And then the other thing I would say is I agree with a lot of what folks said previously, in putting on the Metro hat and thinking about our Parks Department. We have a couple boats we're helping them dispose of right now after they've done the whole process. The capacity to store the boat, our Parks Department's working with a marina to actually store it, because Metro Parks doesn't have that capacity. And then they also don't have the funds to pay for disposal. So we're using actually some solid waste related funding to pay for that. And I know there is currently a reimbursement process for a portion of the funds if it meets a certain criteria. But in thinking about how to kind of, it's a lot of state resources, public resources to pay for it up front and then recoup the cost after the fact. If there was some kind of proactive, streamlined way where maybe it's certain contractors the state has have gone through procurement processes with that are the state certified contractors, you can use them, and there's a relationship and an agreement and understanding up to a certain dollar amount, and then all those upfront costs could be determined before any action, I think would help a lot of the folks who are on that enforcement side and response side of things. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. I'm just, okay, Josh, your hand went down. I was about to see if you had something else. The place I'm going to go out of order on the hands is if DSL staff has something to contribute to that particular piece of the conversation. Chris, I don't know if you're responding to that particular piece or.
I am, yeah. Thank you, Eric. I am responding to that. So with regards to the holding period and disposition or of personal property on state land, we did have an internal policy with regards to that, but we also received legislative clarity in this last session. So I can put a link to House Bill 2238, which was enrolled and I believe is enacted now. And there's a whole section on there on disposal of personal property for the department's authority on state lands. A lot of these boats are on state lands. So happy to share that if it's of interest to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. All right, let's move on to Troy, who's been patiently waiting on the corner of my screen.
Thank you. Troy Wood, Washington Department of Natural Resources, the Derelict Vessel Removal Program. So there was a lot to unpack out of all of that. Our custody process here in Washington, we have to do due process. We have to send out notices to any registered owners, put it on a website and stuff like that before we can even legally remove the vessel. So it used to be 30 days. It's down to 15 days right now. But once we have custody of the vessel, then we have complete, we can do whatever we want with it at that point. We can sell it, we can use it, we can destroy it. And that includes everything that's inside of it. The owners had the original custody period to remove the vessel, and then they have an additional 30 days to appeal the custody process through the court system. Normally, in that time, we leave the vessel where it is located, unless it's a threat to human safety or the environment. And in most cases, it's not. So you can just leave it there while you go through the custody process so you don't have to pay for storage. And then you can go through the contracting process to hire someone to go out there, get it, and dispose of it afterwards. So that would take care of some of that storage issues. And as long as you had the custody process set up like that and the legal issues. As far as unknown owners of vessels, the due process that we do takes care of that as well. It takes care of our legal notices so that the owners can say, hey, look, DNR's trying to take my boat. Maybe I should do something about that. So it doesn't matter if it has an owner or not. And if the vessel is marine debris at this point, it doesn't look like a vessel. It's just a bunch of sticks or whatever out there on the shore. Then we treat that as marine debris, and it doesn't even go through the derelict vessel removal program. It goes through restoration. I hope that answered some of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. I appreciate comments on that. And the issue of ownership, I want to segue over to that in just a second. But Josh?
Yeah, thank you, Troy, for your contribution. I have two questions for you. The first one being, in those situations in which it is an emergency, a threat, something sinking, floating down the river, for instance, and you're forced to intervene, there's still going to be a storage requirement in that regard in Washington, correct?
Yes, so that's a great point. And what we do here in Washington is we already have all of our contractors on 2 separate contracts. One's an emergency contract and one is a normal contract. So in the emergencies, we can just pick up the phone and pick one of those contractors and say, can you deal with this for me? And they'll go out, they'll post a notice on the vessel for our custody process, and then they'll make the vessel safe, whether that's towing it to a marina or taking it off out of the water and on shore or something like that. Then they do that for you. They find the facilities, they make the contacts and everything for you. You're still responsible for the costs, but it's not something that you have to project manage. It's on the contractor at that point.
Awesome, thank you. And then my second question, when you were talking about marine debris, that interests me. Are there statutes somewhere or something I can look at where there's a definition of what marine debris is? Like, when is a boat not a boat?
My best answer to that would be NOAA. NOAA describes abandoned and derelict vessels as marine debris. In Washington state, we have a clear statute that defines what a vessel is. And when it no longer meets that definition, then we categorize it as marine debris. And our restoration crew can go out there and do it. I can give you an example with pictures and stuff like that. There was recently a man-made raft that had a tent on it that was blown ashore and it broke apart. And it didn't look like a vessel at that point. So they declared it marine debris and removed it as such.
That's perfect, thank you.
All right, Stan.
Oh, thanks, Josh. Stan Tonneson again. You brought up the marine debris, and I just want to make sure that maybe we can include those partial docks and all that type of stuff that we see floating around and they get utilized along the shorelines.
So you're not talking strictly about vessel, Stan, right?
Oh, well, no, I mean, you get into marine debris, it made me think that that's another major issue on the waterways are pieces of abandoned dock when a marina, for example, remodels and they donate them and give them away and they end up just floating around the river or get used as part of an encampment of ADV boats. And there's no title, it's just marine debris and it really shouldn't wash down to the shore. It needs to be removed from the river.
Okay.
Does that answer that question, Eric?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to have that clarification. So, all right. Thank you. And Troy, excuse me.
Sorry, I know I take up a lot of the time. Anyway, marine debris in Washington state, I can't remove. I can only remove abandoned and derelict vessels that meet the definition of abandoned and derelict. And so our restoration crews deal with the marine debris because they have the crews to go out there and deal with it themselves, actually. But if it doesn't meet the definition of a vessel that meets the definition of abandoned or derelict, then my program here in Washington is unable to spend any money to do anything with that vessel or that marine debris.
Josh, did you have a follow-up?
Just a commitment to the work group that's something that we'll explore potentially even with the legislature. Where are the lines between this work group and the ADV work and associated marine debris? In many situations, they are usually kind of together, as Stan pointed out. Docks and boats and getting some clarification on the purview of this program is a priority of mine. So that's a commitment that I can make.
Thanks. So, I mean, we've kind of touched a little bit on this, but the concept of what's trash, what's a boat, what's when can the condition of a boat and a lack of recent ownership support an alternative or streamlined process? Any thoughts about that? Sergeant Dangler.
Yeah, thanks, Steve Dangler, Sheriff's Office. We run into that quite regularly. And unfortunately, what occurs is if we don't get it removed or taken care of in a timely manner, it ends up at some other encampment somewhere. And there's, when the transom is falling apart or there's no engine, no helm, the boat's completely stripped, those types of things are things that are clear indicators that this is just trash at this point. We had a vessel that was shoved up on shore at Willamette Park here just recently as well. We knew of that vessel at an encampment, and now all of a sudden loaded with lots and lots of trash. This probably 21-foot fiberglass bayliner is pushed up at Willamette Park and left to sink there. So it was partially submerged. Everything that you could see that was inside of it was clearly trash, nothing of value. And those types of things are those things that we should be able to grab onto and get them disposed of immediately to prevent any other further hazards or contaminations or spills, and to keep our waters clean and beautiful.
Great, thank you. And it gets to the question of, what criteria should be evaluated in making that assessment. And I think one of the things, if I'm hearing you correctly, when you say there's no engine, there's no helm, there's no longer functional as a vessel.
Correct. These vessels are no longer functional as intended use. So, the instruments are missing or completely gone. The helm's completely gone. The engine's gone. There's a sheet of plywood where the transom should be. Things are glued together to hold it together, and it's already up on shore. If it stays around any longer, it's either going to sink in place or become a waterway hazard as it floats downriver.
Great, thank you. All right. Anyone else? Stephanie.
I will just add, because I brought it up earlier. So a lot of times, Stephanie Rawson, Metro, a lot of the times with our illegal dumping program, we get boats tied to stop signs or trees. Actually, in our Chinook landing, we just had 2 boats that were tied to trees in the parking lot that we're dealing with. Our Parks Department went through the process, but there's no registration number. The inside's totally tore out. It is full of trash, feces, and other things that render it unusable, undesirable, and there's no value on it. A lot of times when we find boats dumped at a park or along a roadway and it's blocking access, or if it's left there, could create a hazard. I use myself as lowest common denominator. If I was a child and I was there, would I play with it? Absolutely. Would I want to check it out? Absolutely. Right. So, is there more harm leaving it or for us taking it? And we look at the condition. A lot of times these boats are in really terrible condition. However, if there is a registration or a trailer with a license plate, we want to find out who's responsible so we can hold them accountable, have them pay for that, plus our time to investigate, clean up, etc. But that rarely happens, because usually what we find out, someone sold it 10 or 20 years ago and they don't know who has it. How long have I been in this job? In 11 years I've been here, twice we have found that the boat was stolen and actually returned it to the owner. So, and that's very low. So a lot of times we encounter vessels similar to what Sergeant Dangler was talking about. There's no inherent value for use and functionality. So if there's nothing I can use on that vessel to determine who could potentially be the owner, or we think it's in such a condition that it might be stolen, then we try to move through the process as quickly as possible to dispose of it and unfortunately move on to the next.
Yeah. So you've been pretty consistent with what was brought up before in terms of, the functionality of the boat and ability to use it as a vessel. But you also brought up, if there's no way to identify who the owner is, that also becomes a criteria. Okay. Sergeant Dangler, I think you had your hand up almost as fast as you put it down last time. Did you have a follow-up, or is that from before? Okay.
No, I'm just getting used to my fancy new features here that I'm learning.
Well, enjoy them. Okay, so Katie.
Thanks. Katie Gauthier with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. I was just going to add that when boats wash up on the ocean shore, it is a matter of urgency that we get them off quickly, and we often don't have time to wait for some of the processes because they will wash off in different locations and or move further down the shore, or these are busy beaches that create a safety hazard for the public. So it depends, and sometimes we've been able to work with insurance companies and boat owners to get them off, but if we don't have one of those, then it exacerbates some of the difficulties. So the time constraints are different when it's a boat washing ashore on the ocean shore, and that's been a difficulty that we've.
So where would you go with that though, in terms of, what would help you?
So many of the things that we've talked about here have been helpful. The idea of contractors, a fund would be helpful, someplace to store vessels, and more ability to find the insured are all helpful tools. So all of those things would be great. And Laurel may have some other ideas of things that we've talked about, but those were some of the big ones. If there were more insured vessels, I think that would, when it's an insured vessel, it's a lot easier of a process for us than when it's an uninsured vessel.
Yeah. Okay, great. Stan.
Yeah, Stan Tonneson, Rocky Point. I think all those suggestions from Stephanie and Sergeant Dangler are great. They're a little subjective, so it would be nice if we could nail it down to be more crystal clear to define what's no longer seaworthy or functional. But one other thing I would like to add is perhaps after it's been not registered for X amount of years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it might be, that it automatically qualifies as well. It would incentivize people to keep their boats registered, and more money for the Marine Board as well, which is always kind of a headache for us.
Okay, so
Thank you.
The amount of time after the registration expires is another potential.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen boats 2010, and that's 13 years old. It's just floating. It's just a shell. We should be able to take that out immediately without any worry of retribution.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I just want to make mention here that we'd like to get everybody participating here as much as possible, and so don't feel if you have an idea out there that you're not sure whether or not you want to put it out there, I encourage you to do so, because there, as they say, there are no dumb ideas, right? There's lots of things that you might be thinking about that no one else has thought about. So I just want to encourage folks to speak up if they're sitting on anything that they think might be useful.
I have one thing I might mention. I was looking for my hand. I'm sorry. My name is David Dickerson. I work for the National Marine Manufacturers, and I'm sitting in for Rachel Fisher, who has a family emergency and can't be here. I worked as a state lobbyist on the derelict vessel programs and problems in Florida for a number of years, and they've put together a pretty good menu of both dealing with near derelict as well as derelict. And there's two things I would say. One is that their derelict person might be a great guest or something for this group to kind of spend a few minutes with, to have, to talk to her and say, how is it that you're making this happen in a state like Florida? But also I'd be glad to get in touch with her and say, can you give me a packet of the statutes and other rules that you work under that define derelict, define ownership, define contents, how to deal with the various things you've been talking about? Because they're as was just said by Josh, there's nothing new here. Every state's been dealing with it. So although I don't expect to be on this all the time, I'd be glad to do that if it would be helpful.
I would suggest that you share that information with Josh or Kate. And that they can take that information and do with it and move follow up on that for you.
Yeah, just share it with the group. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I just want to remind people, please raise your hand when you want to talk. Okay. So we're coming sort of toward the end of this discussion, but I wanted to circle back to other challenges that have been encountered by law enforcement, local jurisdictions and ports, or from the private marinas perspective, that are not enforcement agencies. What are some of the other challenges? Aaron?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron Bretz from the Port of Newport again. One of the problems that we run into is if there's somebody on the boat, obviously, it could still be a situation where we've told them to leave, they've failed to move the boat. And I think that to see the point from my perspective here, you'd have to understand if you've not responded to a lot of sinking vessels, or you haven't responded to a lot of vessels who have sunk and taken people down with them, you might not be inclined to look at that situation as though the person's in a great deal of danger if they're tied to the dock. But when you have a vessel that's just in poor condition, and there's somebody on it, that person needs to get off the boat, not just because you need to seize the boat, but they're in a dangerous situation. It's not that they're taking shelter. It's in particular in a coastal environment where the water temperature stays at 50 degrees year round. It's not like a person who's taking shelter in an urban environment where they've got cover over their head or something like that. They're in serious danger of the vessel sinking and taking them down with it, or they went up in the water where they're going to live about 10 minutes. And I think we need to take a more realistic stance to that, and get more serious about removing people from those dangerous situations on vessels whether they shouldn't even be on to begin with. But aside from that, once they're off the boat, then you can deal with it just like the rest of our conversations. But there's a great reluctance to remove people from vessels that are dangerous because they're worried about we can't, we have to allow them to take shelter, etc. But the point that I'm making is that a vessel of the type that we're talking about is not safe shelter for them to be in. It's completely dangerous.
And Aaron, just for clarification purposes here, you're referring primarily to people who are unhoused, or the boat is the house, so to speak.
To me, it's the same. It's basically the same thing. If you got somebody who's unhoused and they're staying on board a boat, or if that boat happens to be their primary residence, it's one and the same. You got to have some standards, I think, where you can recognize that this boat is not safe for you to even stand on. If you're standing on the dock saying, I'm not going to step foot on that boat, there ought to be a mechanism in place for you to remove the person from the situation, because they shouldn't be there either.
So, okay, that's a great example of a challenge that you've encountered. Stan?
Oh, thank you, Eric. Stan Thomas in Rocky Point Marina. I'll speak from the marina side of things again. Most marinas have one or two boats that they'd like to get rid of. One issue that we have is acquiring ownership of the vessel. That takes a while through an auction process, perhaps. And to be involved in the turn-in program, or at least the NOAA one in the past, we needed to have the vessel in the marina's name. It couldn't be in the customer's name. A good example of another situation happened today. Well, it's been going on for several years. He's very old. He's in assisted living, semi-dementia, wants keep that boat. He's got insurance on it, so we let it stay in the water. We've given him an eviction notice, but there's no place to go and no way for him to do it. Today, I got a call that he's in the hospital, so he'll probably pass away. And then the estate's been trying to help me as well. I mean, his heirs, they're not heirs yet, his family. So there's a situation where this boat, I know if he might just give it to somebody. It's a $30,000 job to raise that boat if it sinks. It's got fuel in it. It hasn't ran for 25 years, but it's a prime example of where these boats come from that are ending up sunk or abandoned on our shorelines. It's a great boat to live in. It's a piece of crap. And I think if I saw it leave, I would call the Coast Guard as being an unsafe vessel. So these are some of the challenges we have just as a marina operator. This is just a regular thing. People get old, they want to hang on to their boat till the day they die. And then they die, and then we have this problem, the boat sitting there. And it would be nice just to be able to get it disposed of. Thank you.
That's an interesting issue, interesting challenge. Josh, you had your hand up. Are you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was just going to ask Stan, I think it's kind of an unfair question almost, is yes, every situation's different and interesting, but you know, that situation is not uncommon at all. Like what in your mind, or for the rest of the group, what's that specific solution to that situation? Is that a legal change, a policy change, a law enforcement change? I mean, because it happens all the time. How do we fix it?
That's a good question, Josh. Perhaps some law that says that death, if it fits a certain criteria, then it could be disposed of. I don't know. It has no value. Or maybe the estate will get it and then sell it for $1,000 unbeknownst to me. I'd like to haul the water sometime, but since it's insured, I really don't have a right to do it other than the fact he didn't fulfill his 30-day eviction notice I sent him. So that's tough for me. I get into a hard situation and I don't want to be storing boats forever.
All right. We're going to have to move on here fairly shortly, but so is it David, right? You're on mute.
The state of Florida's program has a menu, and if a vessel can't be lit, dewatered, if it's a liveaboard, if it doesn't have working sanitary facilities, there's one or two others. I think if it's 3 out of the 5 can't be met, it is declared pre-derelict, and then they can basically seize the vessel and deal with it. So that, you know, that doesn't fix the funding problem or other things. But if you're at a point, Stan, where you know, are willing to be hard-nosed about it, and that statute was in place, the officer could come in and put that criteria up and say, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't meet 3 of the 5. It therefore, you know, you have no choice. I have the state has the right to then take care of the vessel. And they're very inclined to do that because, as you say, it's tremendously less expensive if you can get it under their definition of pre-derelict.
All right, thank you, David. Sergeant Dangler.
Yeah. First off, I love the last idea, that 3 out of 5. If there's 3 things out of the 5 met, then it's considered pre-derelict. I like going down that road to be able to show that action has been taken and that we're going to be going to those next steps now, where we end up taking possession and removing the individual from the vessel. I think that'd be a great idea. Back to Stan, though, there needs to be an out for families in especially these types of circumstances, but these type of circumstances like Josh was talking about do happen all too often. A lot of morages and marinas, instead of going through the disposal route, they sell it for cheap on Craigslist, which is contributing to what we see out on our waterways when it comes to abandoned derelicts and transients living aboard these vessels. So Stan had mentioned that they sent an eviction notice, those types of things. If we could have a mailer that goes out in that eviction notice to say, hey, here are some options, here is a turn-in, I know Metro, Oregon State Marine Board, and our agency's been working on that turn-in program. There's been success with a couple of those turn-in programs over the years here in the state of Oregon. And I think if we could keep something like that up and rolling, the longer we do it, obviously the less we're going to have, but the longer we do it, the better the word gets out, and more people that are willing to step forward and be like, okay, we don't want the hassle. We'll sign this vessel over and it can be disposed of properly so that it doesn't end up on our waterways. So again, I go back to that vessel turn-in program so people have the options available, that if a certain circumstance came up, such as what Stan was talking about, that there is an out and that you're not left financially liable or responsible. And then it clears the mortgages and marinas out for the owners to be able to rent those slips out. But it gets those boats off of our waterway.
Thank you very much, Sergeant. I know we're going to have to move on, but Josh, are you responding?
Yeah,
to
no,
that?
I was just gonna kind of wrap this part of today up with just what I'm hearing, what I'm gonna start putting words to paper or actions to. First, how big of an issue storage actually is. Troy from Washington, brought up some ways to alleviate that issue. But just we at DSL being aware how big of an issue that is, especially for local jurisdictions. And so the assumption shouldn't be there that storage is the easy part, because it's certainly not. So making sure that there's some private capacity to deal with that it needs to be considered. Certainly a whole lot of talk about, hey, the cash has to be there for anyone to start on any kind of seizure process. So that was heard loud and clear. Also, I forget who said, DSL must have the capacity to do some of these things soup to nuts, but that was certainly heard as well, that we here need to be able to, if needed, to go through pretty much the whole process to make sure we can account for that. And then also I was really intrigued by when a boat stops meeting the definition of a boat. That's kind of an interesting way to look at it. I'm going to start thinking about our statutes, the way they're written now, that yes, I mean, a boat, I don't know it verbatim, but it needs to be capable of transport on the water. At some point if that's not being met, then we can, look at that boat versus marine debris. So I'm going to look into that as well. So those are the takeaways for me from this conversation, but feel free to reach out to me with other ideas. And then, as we get going into like January, you're going to start seeing some of these things into proposals that then this group can rip apart for me. So thank you, Eric. I think we're good on that, unless anyone else has anything on vessel seizure.
Sergeant Dangler, do you have a one sentence comment?
Maybe 3 sentences, but I'll make it quick. Exactly what Josh was talking about with that storage. We try to do what we can to store what we have on our waterways until it comes to that disposal time. But it was brought up earlier with like the coastal areas where we also have tidal effect and we have the effect from multiple dams. And this area, obviously Bonneville Dam. So, any given day, our water could go up or down 5, 6, 8 feet or up, which then creates a washout. So those are things that we pay close attention to. I know I'm watching a couple right now that we have posted for seizure and just kind of crossing my fingers that they don't float away. But those are things that we do try to help to mitigate, but there are certain times that things are unavoidable.
All right, thank you, Sergeant. Okay, we've gone over a little bit on time on this, but it's been a really great discussion, and I really want to thank everybody for your participation in this, and we'll have another active discussion coming up here shortly. But I was thinking that it'd probably be a good time for a short bio break. If we could take 5 minutes, come back at 2:10, and we will pick up again. Thank you. Okay. All right. We still have a fair amount to cover here, so I don't want to delay things, but I do want to make mention. Keep an eye out on the chat on the side. Sometimes some of you do offer good or you offer comments, and Stephanie Rawson in the last discussion offered up some of their experience in terms of documenting vessels. So just want to point those out as we go through. So, but with that, let's move on to Josh, second piece.
Sure, thank you, Eric. So the second piece of today, I rather erroneously labeled it peripheral support and resources, enforcement, compliance, staffing, kind of all those things outside of funding and resources specific to kind of vessel removal. Like what else needs to be in place for this work to actually happen? So in this arena, we heard quite a few things from the interviews during the summer. One was kind of a simple, can there be funding for local law enforcement efforts for vessel registration, other kind of marine laws? The short answer there is yes. I think I would like this group to discuss whether and how far the state should go in that direction. But from a feasibility standpoint, the answer is absolutely yes. And there's also questions regarding can there be authority for the state personnel to enforce those same laws? The answer to that's also at least potentially yes. That would require some statute changes, some resource changes probably at this agency, but it could be on the table. So I'm happy to hear the group talk about that more. And then there was also just the recognition that for the state's ADV program to be effective, there needs to be some IT support, some GIS support, for instance. This is certainly a spatial issue, so that must be recognized and resourced appropriately. Also, just the realization that some of the projects, especially the big projects, the larger boats, are very, very complicated, very complex, involve a whole lot of different state and usually federal agencies that needs to be accounted for. And then there was a kind of an open-ended question that came from the interviews regarding how community members, non-governmental organizations, how can they be brought into this and to these efforts to address marine debris and problems associated with abandoned derelict vessels. So the next slide. I have just some questions that I'd pose to the group, but the conversation certainly does not need to be limited to these. But one is long-term, where can funding, and we're not talking about a specific dollar amount yet, we get to that later in December and have some conversations there, but where can funding best support the ADV program and for vessel removals? Thinking about the conversation earlier, and the reason I planned this one after that process conversation was it was identified, hey, DSL needs to build some capacity to assist with a removal soup to nuts, so to speak. So it sounds like that's something that this group supports putting resources to. But what other things like that need to be supported? And then also, what functions does an ongoing program need to support? Even the money part out of it. Is there more vessel registration compliance was brought up? Does that need more enforcement? What other things need to happen? And then this last one, and I really don't know the answer to this, is what entities are currently under-resourced or underutilized in this effort? Like maybe who else needs to be at this table? Who else do we need to reach out to and say, hey, you're in a position to help with this work? Let's identify those so that we can figure out who else might need to be at the table. So that's my send-off, Eric, and I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Josh. All right, so we'll go back to our group cameras here. And Aaron, you're first out of the gate.
Thank you. Yeah, Aaron Bretz from the Port of Newport again. You mentioned the vessel registrations, and we've talked a couple times about committing resources to enforcing that. One thing about that, I don't think that it necessarily. Although a lot of abandoned vessels are not current on their registrations, I don't necessarily know that that when you get them, establishing currency on your registration does not make the vessel seaworthy or decent. We really, we pushed a lot of people in our marina to get their registrations current, and they did, but they didn't change anything about the boats. So I think there again, it would be difficult. I recognize that, but development of some kind of standards to further quantify that word seaworthy, because it's a really squishy thing, and it's easy to refute. We use seaworthy in our facilities codes, but it's not hard to call it into question if I really wanted to. So some standards, and this is a legislative effort, but then on the enforcement side of that, you would need people to be out there enforcing these standards, and I don't think that we currently have the resources dedicated in any of our state or local county law enforcement to be able to absorb that. There's too many boats, and one thing you might consider is, I think I mentioned this before, but I think the Coast Guard a couple of years ago decided to start outsourcing the CF visa program to inspectors. There's some companies that are out there that are doing CF visa inspections, I think, for the Coast Guard, that maybe they could expand their business a little bit and do something on behalf of the state if the state was to get them under contract to do some kind of inspections on boats, either by direction or in general. The state set some standards and then set some enforcement goals by percentage of number of boats that are out there. Put somebody on contract to get out there and get those inspections done. I don't know, but I also recognize that doing this for vessels that are, smaller than 32 feet or so is probably, there's a lot of boats that are that size. And those aren't really in my opinion, they're not the ones that are sucking up a lot of resources and time and money. I think you'd be better served to focus on some standards for vessels 30 feet and larger, and then concentrate on some inspection efforts on those boats, and continue to deal with the smaller boats, in a different fashion.
Okay, so having funding that supports the enforcement or other types of accountability sounds like something you'd be advocating for there. Okay, anyone else want to address the question of where can the funding best support the ADV program outside of vessel removal? Okay.
I just wanted to share that a common theme that was through a lot of the interviews was the need to have two parallel conversations, and Aaron just kind of identified it just now, like when we're talking about the larger vessels and when we're talking about the smaller vessels, and really, so something I heard in almost every interview is just the need that it's not all kind of one conversation. So just wanted to acknowledge that and thank Aaron for kind of calling out that difference there for that question.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else want to tackle this question? Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie Rawson with Metro. I just want to, listen to what Aaron had to say about kind of the thought about inspecting vessels as a kind of a proactive enforcement. I think it's a worthwhile consideration. As a former state inspector for solid waste facilities and other sort of things, it was a lot of resources in the sense you had to have staff going out to these facilities, building relationships and knowing what to look for. But you build relationships with those entities and you can address things when they're more manageable because you're working with those that are regulated, like what's really the issue, what are we working for. So, and then it's a lot cheaper in a lot of ways to work with folks in a proactive than having to deal with this abandoned item that it's always more expensive to address it, and it's also more time consuming and expensive from a state resource if you have to go through an enforcement route. And I think that's an interesting idea. If you just kind of look at any sort of enforcement program, if you can be proactive, have relationships, and be having more eyes on that, where the kind of pros and cons. However, you're going to have a significant increase in staffing likely to do some of that. So where's the pros and cons? So I just wanted to kind of, I think that's an interesting thought, and I think there's value there. So I just wanted to share that.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So I mean, just sort of recognizing that there's kind of an administrative support piece to this to help facilitate all of these things going on and moving forward. All right, Stan?
Yeah, hi, Stan Thomas in Rocky Point Marina and Boatyard. And I'll speak from the boatyard standpoint. We're a professional boatyard repair, working on boats from 30 to 60 foot. And the cycle that these boats go through, the insurance dictates a lot of it. Um, Requires an inspection of the vessel out of the water every 2 to 4 years, especially on the older boats, a wooden boat for certain. But as a boat approaches 30 years, it requires more inspections. The professional inspectors, which is the SAM Society of Marine Surveyors, will give a laundry list of things that are deficient, meeting the ABYC standards. And if they don't those, the insurance company will no longer insure the boat. But we'll give them a bid on repairs or upgrade. It might be $30,000 to $50,000. Not uncommon. It might be 5 or 10. But the boat owner goes, well, the boat's only worth 10. I can't afford all that. I think I'll just give it away. So that's the vicious cycle that happens when boats do get surveyed. Because it's really sometimes just a matter of a faulty hose on an intake that you can't see from the outside, and most people wouldn't even see it on a quick visual inspection. Anyway,
So, I mean,
that's
obviously,
the problem we see.
yeah, definitely an issue. Flipping the coin just over on the solution side of this, where do you see an opportunity here?
Well, the opportunity would be the turn-in program that instead of the owner just trying to give the boat away at a low price, that it could be turned in. I know it takes their responsibility away. And when I tried to run that by Senator Johnson back when I introduced that one bill, she goes, "No way would I promote, the state paying for removal or taking somebody's financial responsibility away from them." But I think it's a good idea somehow to make it easier for them, or at least or less costly.
Okay, great, thanks. Troy?
Prevention, I think, needs funding as well as the staff, other than the removals of vessels and stuff like that. Prevention is key, I think. Outreach and education in particular, where you're going out into the public and educating them on vessel statutes and responsible vessel ownership. We found registration was one of the first indicators that someone was ignoring their vessel, and therefore it was going to become abandoned or derelict. Same thing with marinas, where they stop paying their mortgage and stuff like that. As far as vessels on shore, we took those too, because sometimes the vessels are on trailers that are worth more than the vessels themselves. So they take it down to the local fishing hole and launch the boat and then drive away with the trailer to sell it somewhere. So we put that into our prevention program as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Troy. And that's a good point related to education and the possible need for the resources to do that education. So, Aaron?
Yeah, so this might be out of turn. It's a little bit off the current subject, but Stan reminded me of something I keep thinking about. He mentioned that that turn-in program thing and funding it, and so it would be controversial, I think, for in some people's mind if the state started funding something like that. But is there a way for us to somehow or another, whether this be done at the federal level, because it'd be an interstate thing, but what about some sort of core charge on boats that goes into some kind of fund someplace that eventually, in theory, you establish the rate by boat, by foot, or something like that, that would pay to dispose vessels in some kind of program, and it'd be you'd have to do it on both ends. You have to assemble that fund on one side, and on the other, you have to make these you have to work the supply chain to keep the cost of disposal down so that it can actually fund the disposal. But something along the lines of like the first owner of the boat pays some kind of core charge, or every time the boat changes hands, there's a core charge that has to get paid somewhere along the lines, and then that goes into a fund someplace. I don't know. It's I haven't put much thought into it. It's just an idea.
Great. All right, let's switch gears here and just ever so slightly, but talk about, what are the functions that an ongoing program is going to need to support, either internal to DSL or through agreements with other entities. Troy.
Thank you. Where do I start? You're definitely going to, if you're going to have GIS, you're going to have some IT help, as well as outreach and education. You're going to have people out there doing that. You're going to be asked to go do seminars in some places where you're going to teach them how to deal with these abandoned and derelict vessels. So those functions are going to be key. Phones and computers, obviously, everyone's going to have those, the functions. So the main functions of the program are to deal with these abandoned and derelict vessels, right? So you're going to have someone answering phones, answering emails, some way for them to get those reports to you. So are you going to have an app? Are you going to use like MyCoast or a website, or is it just strictly by phone number? And how do they know to call that phone number? So you have to have that outreach and education. Those are just some of the thoughts that are off the top of my head. But you're also going to have contracting support. So when you do contracts with these contractors and stuff like that, you'll have to have that support. Either it's from another agency at the state level or in your own agency. But you'll have to have contracting support to set those up and run those, especially when you put it out for bid. Who's going to run that? Is it your contracting or is it another agency or something like that? So, and then, yeah, a database or storage system. So we take a lot of pictures of these vessels and we have them stored on electronic files, and all the information about ownership and the history of the vessel and stuff, and that's all stored on there. So that'll have to be addressed as well, I think. Thank you.
Spoken from experience. All right, thank you, Troy. Stan.
Sorry, Stan Tonneson again. Maybe a real pipe dream, but people have asked me before, well, what would be if you had a magic lamp? How would you solve this storage problem, for example? Perhaps if the funding was available, what could be utilized? Ideally, I would think a few centralized storage areas. I could visualize some really shallow water areas where it could be boomed off. You just keep adding vessels until you have enough to pull out. If there was a dedicated site owned by the state, perhaps, rather than a private entity. That's if there was funding available. It's kind of a dream. But you.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. If there's funding available, where's it going to go? Kate.
I have just a different way to ask one of the questions, which is, and it's kind of ties to something I think someone else mentioned, was like, include the educational piece in existing processes. So like if in an eviction notice, and I think the same thing about education, it's a resource staffing, it was being built into like lease renewals and that information getting pushed out that way. So I guess my question is sort of around, underutilized, under-resourced or underutilized existing processes that maybe could support like adding that information to an existing process. I didn't ask. Oh, I'm not doing a good job of asking my question. Maybe someone, our facilitator, can help me with that one.
I'll actually tell you what, Eric, I'll jump in because I did have kind of that same question for Troy. Is I've heard quite a bit about, hey, education and outreach needs to be part of the solution, and I certainly don't disagree with that. I do struggle sometimes with what exactly does that look like. I mean, is it seminars saying, hey, don't abandon your boats? Like, I know I'm trivializing it, but at least from Washington's standpoint, what efforts in that realm have you seen as successful?
Great question. So we go to like boat shows and have a booth, and we do outreach and education there because ultimately, we're going to be talking to these boat owners at some point in their boat's career or lifespan. We also go out to ports and marinas and give presentations and to educate the ports and the marinas on the program so that they can in turn educate the vessel owners that are mooring their vessels there. We go out to county commissioners meetings and we educate them so that they can be drawn in as an authorized public entity. So there's a lot of outreach and education opportunities out there. We have actually partnered up with Sea Grant of Washington and utilized their outreach abilities and their Rolodex to get the message out and stuff like that. Our website has been updated to get the education out there as well. We developed a flyer that we drop off and hand out everywhere we go, marinas, port districts, boat shows, wherever. And hopefully that'll get to the people who are non-electronic. And yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities. And I try and get my commissioner in front of the television talking about a program as much as possible. And that educates a lot of the people that are watching for the television and stuff. So yeah, believe it or not, the program's been here for over 20 years, and I still run into people in the boating industry that has never heard of my program. So it's a constant struggle, but it really pays off in the long run. I have one other thing about the function of the program is field work. You're going to hire contractors to go out and do the removals and stuff like that. Are you going to have contract reps oversee the work being done? Or how are you going to make sure that the contractors are doing the work that you want them to do and in the way that you want them to do it?
Sorry, kind of speaking out of turn, but how much of that happens in Washington? I mean, do you have your folks on site for most of those contracted jobs?
Well, we establish a relationship with them. So when we first hire a contractor, we hold their hands through the process, for quite a few until we feel comfortable that they understand what we're asking for. And after that, we ask for photographic evidence. We ask for weight tickets from landfills or transfer stations and stuff like that to make sure that they're not taking it somewhere else. We've had an incident where someone tried to steal a boat from us, and that's how we solved that, was asking for that weight ticket. So yeah, there's some things that you can do to make sure that they're doing the job, but sometimes you just have to go out there and watch them do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, you've been waiting patiently. I also noticed that you had in the chat written an idea about the NOAA grants. So do you want to speak to that or something else?
Something else. When people were talking about funding, I'm always trying to find a way to use the NOAA marine debris grants because there's always a lot of money there, and I always come up a little short, or it's outside of my roles and responsibilities, so I can't tap it. There's always money there, so I was like, how can we tap that? So I just wanted to make sure folks just keep that fresh in folks' minds. There's a lot of conversations about databases and data collection, working with contractors as a program that collects a lot of data, and we have contractors collect data for us electronically. It helps enormously in just staff time, and then and there's a lot of kind of on the shelf GIS programs that are pretty easy to build and use, and they're user friendly. But I would completely advocate is that you need one IT person to support that. We for years did not have it, and we had to share resources, and I finally got one, and it's designated just for our program. It's made a world of difference because you need to be able to pivot when you're having these data collection and other program errors, but it can make a world of difference being able to intelligently talk about what's going on and know what's happening. Something else to think about is you're talking about sharing information, or like what other agencies can play different roles. What information do they already collect what are opportunities to sort of share that information? And there's a lot of different platforms, such as like a Power BI platform, for example. There's many different ones that multiple different databases can talk to the same dashboard without having any infringement on who accesses or edits that data, and you can pick and choose what's available. Just food for thought and thinking about how can you tap into what's already existing instead of recreating stuff. Just food for thought there. The educational component, think about you know, like on the website, I like a lot of the things that Troy had said, but folks are always, I know Dorothy Deal gets a lot of questions of like, where can I dispose of my boat? What am I responsible doing? Thinking about how to have like an educational page and that kind of points all agencies to that location. Videos are really great, especially if you have any sort of folks that do education in your agencies for any group. They can be really creative, and it really helps people kind of understand that. I'd also tap into your comms folks about using different social media and different opportunities there. And then also thinking about, where do boat users go? If a lot of folks are fishermen, where do they go to get their fishing permits or to put in? Are there opportunities there and recreational guides to get those sort of information out? And then the last thing I just want to talk about is thinking about who or what other entities should be involved in thinking about where agreements are, is thinking of like kind of the checklist of what are the roles and responsibilities and steps. And that can help identify not only who you may need an intergovernmental agreement with or some other sort of contract, but then if you have this checklist, then each time you're going through whether a certain step is needed, and it just kind of having that step process really kind of standardizes the process and can keep things moving forward without dropping a step or two. There's always so much going on, so it's easy to drop those steps.
Great, thank you. A lot of ideas all at once, so that's great. Troy?
Thank you. So still talking about the functions of the program.
Yes.
I don't know if Oregon is going to require you to do debt collection. So you're going to spend this money on this vessel to remove it. Are you going to go after the owner for restitution of those costs? And if so, you're going to need someone to support that. Also, you're going to have a budget. You're going to have someone dealing with the budget. Also, bill paying. You're hiring all these contractors and stuff like that. Who's paying those bills? So just some thoughts. And someone asked about insurance, and yes, Washington State does require all vessels that have a tenant agreement to have insurance, and the mortgage facility to have insurance. Otherwise, they lose the ability to access the derelict vessel removal account.
And I want to move on to one more question here, but Sergeant Dangler, did you have another thought?
Yeah, just a quick thought on who has control more so over the funds, and why I believe it needs to be more centralized to one agency, as all of these factors that we're talking about are things that we run into. And I'll talk with the Oregon State Marine Board, and there's one set of rules. I'll go through Department of State Lands. There's another set of rules. I'll work with Stephanie, and we've got rules through Metro. So if we could have all of this facilitated through one fluid mechanism in place that's attainable statewide for everybody, that is where we are going to benefit and the public is going to immensely benefit. As far as the funding, and I don't want to speak for the Marine Board, but the Marine Board doesn't have any general funds associated by the state. The Marine Board is funded by gas tax, United States Coast Guard grants, and registrations only. So I think the burden truly goes beyond just the boating community when it comes to keeping our waterways clean and clear. It's everybody's responsibility, and how do we all partake in ensuring that?
Okay, Great. Thank you, Sergeant. All right, I'd like to just toss out one more question, and then in about 5 minutes, we're going to switch over to community comment. And that is, what entities are being under-resourced or underutilized right now? Troy.
I would have to say authorized public entities. So that's what we have in our state, because we have 5 people for the whole state. But with authorized public entities, I could have 55 team members all across the state removing vessels all at the same time. They all have to come to us for the money, but they can all follow the statutes to get the legal right to remove the vessels, to contract with the state contractors, and then all they have to do is ask for reimbursement. Now, we handle it by, before they start a project, we bookmark money for them, provided that it's a priority for the state to remove that vessel. And with that bookmark, we're going to guarantee them at least that much money to be reimbursed to them after the project has finished. So by doing that, I can increase my team quite a bit.
Yeah. Josh, did you have a follow-up question or a comment on that?
I did. So Troy, thank you. When an entity wants to become one of those authorized public entities in which have access to the funds you have available, what does that initial process look like? I mean, if I'm a county, for instance, I call you and say, hey, I want to do this. What then happens on your end?
That's a great question. And yes, it's that simple. So if a port district wanted to remove a vessel out of their jurisdiction under the Derelict Vessel Removal Act, if they wanted guaranteed funds for reimbursement at the end of the project, they would call me or email me and tell me about the project, and I would ask them a few questions to see if it's a priority and if it's a good idea to do the removal. And if so, we talk about how much it's going to cost based on past experiences, and I put a line item in my budget as a bookmark for that reimbursement, and they would be guaranteed up to that limit for a reimbursement. But they could spend over it, and if I had the funds, I would reimburse them. But if they went under it, obviously, I'm not going to give them all of the funds either. So, yes, and at the end of the project, they just fill out an application for reimbursement with all the information on the vessel and how the project went, and showed proof that they followed the statutes for custody of the vessel. And I review all of that and send them a check.
All right, thank you. Sergeant Dangler.
Yeah, Steve Dangler again. I'd like to piggyback exactly what Troy was talking about. For us here, Multnomah County, I've got 8 deputies out on the water. You encompass the public entities that could be assisting and facilitating through this process. And now we've got 80 to 100 personnel that could be helping just in this county when we talk about the inclusion of those other public entities that could be assisting.
Yeah, so broadening that network. Definitely. Okay. Any other suggestions, comments? And I notice there's also more feedback coming in on the chat, so please pay attention. I'm not going to call it out one by one, but just want to make a note. Stan?
Yeah, one entity or entities that I think are underutilized are the commercial towboat operators, the recreational ones. They generally aren't the ones that are already contracted with the state. Vessel Assist, Columbia Marine Assistance. They're on the water every day, raising sunken boats, towing sunken boats. They see everything. They know everything. But they don't have an office. It's just them. They can't do paperwork that the state requires. But they're out there and they're a resource, and they could get stuff off the water so much faster, perhaps cheaper, but they just can't do the paperwork and meet all the requirements.
Great, thank you.
And I know that because the person that ran and owned Vessel Assist worked for me for like 10 years. So I know the insides on that. That's just frustrating. They would bid on a job and they'd rather just go out and raise sunken boats every day. They make a lot more money.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Well, at this point, I think we need to segue over to the community input portion of the meeting. And thank you all for all of your contributions. So for those of you who are attending who are not work group members that want to make comments, I would ask that you, just like everybody else, raise your hand to provide community input. The time's limited, so we're going to be asking you to limit your remarks and to 2 minutes. And just if you need to raise your hand, click the reactions near the bottom of your screen, click raise hand, or by pressing *9 if you're on the phone. And I will call on you in the order in which your hand is raised. But please keep your mic muted until it's your turn to speak. When it is your turn to speak, please say your name, where you're from, or any organization you're representing. And like I mentioned, keep it to 2 minutes. And Sergeant Dangler, is this?
Yeah, really quick, to add on what Stan was talking about, we've ran into some barriers also with our Superfund cleanup site, where now we're looking at, okay, whoever's going to be helping to facilitate the removal of these vessels because of what can be disturbed of a sunk vessel that landed on the bottom. Now they need higher insurance coverage because it's a Superfund cleanup site, in which all we're trying to do is just clean the river to begin with. So we've ran into a couple different barriers like that. So I'll be done and we'll move on to public. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. I want to make sure that those who want to participate that are not part of the work group get their time here. Okay, so is there anyone not on the work group who would like to make a comment? Not seeing any raised hands. I'm just going to give it just a little longer, just in case somebody's struggling to find out where that raise hand function is. Don't want to cut folks off too soon here. And we're not seeing anyone. So please, but don't feel shy. All right. Well, we won't twist your arm any more than that. So with that, we will close the community input session, not having anybody raise their hand, and it takes us to the end of the meeting. Before I pass it over to Josh to close the meeting, I just want to remind you that we have a hybrid meeting at the next meeting, hoping to see you there in person. If you can be there, I'd love to meet everybody in person. So if you have any questions about that, please ask Kate. She will give you all the logistics on that front. But I also want to say these meetings are 2 hours, and you may think of things outside of the meeting. Please do not hesitate to contact Josh or Kate with your ideas and your comments. Please feel free to contact me with any thoughts about the facilitation or the process, and we will go from there. But thank you all for your participation. It was good to have a very robust discussion this time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
I'm just gonna mirror exactly what you just said. I appreciate the conversation today and focusing on some solutions that we can work towards. I mean, that's the goal of this work group, and so I appreciate all of your time. Following up on the second half of today's conversation, some of the things that I'm hearing, and we'll think about how we do them is, do we want to develop some sort of seaworthiness standards and try to get those into some sort of law? But of course, there would need to then be enforcement for that. So, a tricky conversation. There was an idea about, contract with Coast Guard's inspectors to look at big boats. And I think there's certainly some merit there. I never really thought about that before today. or this need for a state marine inspector, I guess you could call it. But I also thought Stan brought up a great point is, okay, you know, once inspections turn up deficiencies, what then happens? Is that where a vessel turn-in program could come in? So things to think about there. And I also, something Troy said regarding accessing, you know, funds available for ADVs contingent upon maybe certain best management practices like insurance. I think there's some merit there, and there's something to explore there. So I just want to leave you all with kind of the next steps for the next 2 meetings, so the rest of this year. In 2 weeks, our topics are going to be prevention and disposal. And I strategically, there was a method to my madness on thinking about the different topics, because prevention to me is going to be a lot of vessel turn-in program conversation, maybe more of the education outreach part. And then also there's been a lot of ideas regarding insurance, and we need to dive into those. And then that December 19th meeting right before Christmas is going to be the one where we talk about funding, not only how much, you know, where it comes from, but how much is needed short-term, long-term, and then the best ways to efficiently spend or contract that money out. So that's what the end of this year looks like to me. And then the January meetings, and as you probably saw earlier, we did have 1 meeting planned. That made me a little nervous, so we've made that into 2 meetings in January to take all these conversations that we had for us at DSL to put those into action items, then vet them through this group, so that by the end of January we have something, a proposal that we all either agree on, or at the very least had an opportunity to provide input on. So that's my plan. And then, as Eric said, if you have ideas after these meetings, please do not hesitate to contact me or Kate. Right now, my email box is not filling up with stuff yet. I'm still relatively new here, and so I'm happy to talk with any of you about ideas that you might have. So that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll plan to see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.